So with that, let me welcome you all to CyFy 2016. Over the next 3 days, we will be a 700-strong gathering of speakers, delegates, and participants from 45 countries. And on behalf of the Observer Research Foundation, let me thank you all for joining us this evening and for the next 2 days. In particular, let me take a moment to welcome the 15 government delegations and high-level coordinators who have all but ensured that CyFy 2016 is amongst the most formidable sites for debate and discussion today. At last count, we had 148 international visitors, and your participation makes this a truly inclusive platform, and we seek your continued support. Now, CyFy is not an annual event. It's actually an initiative. This happens to be a culmination of a year-long series of conversation that we have had both at home and abroad, and guided by the research we have produced at ORF. Let me briefly detail the scope and nature of these conversations that took place over the past year. Connectivity has featured prominently in our government's digital policy, both within India and in the region. ORF, along with the World Economic Forum, hosted a regional platform on Digital South Asia this summer. We saw participation from ministers from South Asia, and nearly all countries were represented in the various conversations we had organized. The South Asian Dialogue is the first of its kind, where traditional models of disparate geographies have struggled. Digital connectivity may provide some solutions. We have endeavored to explore them in this particular initiative. ORF's contribution to the BRICS diplomacy in this space saw us hosting the first ever Digital BRICS Summit in April 2016, bringing government officials, business, and civil society to talk about our consolidated effort to make cyberspace more inclusive and prosperous. In fact, just last week at the BRICS Academic Forum, ORF has announced setting up of a BRICS digital task force to explore both security and economy aspects and how we can work together on the global stage. India's membership in the 2016 UNGGE tasked to create global cyber norms is a significant development. ORF has been a part of this conversation. Earlier this year, our team offered independent legal expertise via the UNIDIR to the GGE. ORF was also represented in the official Indian delegation to the Tallinn Manual Process, a non-governmental initiative to identify law of armed conflict in cyberspace. The US-India Track 1.5, co-convened by ORF and the Council on Foreign Relations just yesterday, commenced almost concurrently with the norms framework agreement signed by both sides. We have already met twice, and we have set a forward-looking and advanced agenda for bilateral cyber relationships with the United States and its actors. The impact of mega-regional trading agreements on the digital economy is another area that we paid attention to this year. At the Asia-Pacific Institute for Digital Economy and the Asia-Pacific Regional Internet Governance Forum, ORF convened dialogues on the impact of these agreements, on the future of these agreements, and what they mean for India, even though we may not be a party to them. ORF's research output, a sampling of which is available and maybe in your hands already today, is a product of these conversations. In some cases, we have hosted dialogues abroad, and in some brought those conversations to New Delhi. They have materialized into research papers, briefing notes, and outcome documents. Your inputs on these would be well received and would help us shape our future research agenda. CyFy 2016 panels reflect the combination of these dialogues and research of the last year. They've been carefully curated for you to introspect, critique, absorb, or reject. I welcome you all to Delhi, and I look forward to engaging with all of you over the next 2.5 days. With this, let me welcome the Director of the Observer Research Foundation to welcome you all formally. Mr. Sanjay Joshi, please.
Excellencies gathered here, distinguished delegates, experts, colleagues, friends, netizens especially for the CyFy 2016. A very warm welcome to all of you. This is the 4th edition, as Samir told you, of CyFy, which is hosted by ORF. And I'm extremely delighted that all of you, some of you have traveled very far to come here, have joined us in New Delhi for this edition. The theme for this year is a kind of a question, I think. Is Digital Asia scripting the new governance order? And there were reasons why we put this question as a central theme. Because the obvious question begets whether a digital Asia truly exists, or is what we call digital Asia just a sideshow of the much bigger, larger rock concert taking place on both sides of the Atlantic, playing by rules which are created there, riding on apps, on innovation, on inventions, powered by those very innovations which are taking place in Silicon Valley. It does, yes, in many ways, it is serving to create wealth, create a lot of activity in this part of the world. But most of it is taking place, the largest part of it is taking place somewhere else. So therefore, the question. But I would dare to argue, and that is the proposition which we would put forward here, that this question has already been answered. Now, however amorphous the net may be, or however indescribable may be the Asian digital reality as it is seen, it exists, it is very much there. And the sheer numbers and demographics, if nothing else, the sheer numbers and demographics ensure that this will certainly exert and influence the network as well as the net worth, the net value of the network of networks, which is the internet. And there's no escaping from this reality. While internet penetration rates may vary from about 36% in India to 52% in China to over 90% in Japan and South Korea, these 4 countries alone account for over 1.3 billion users. And I'm not even counting the burgeoning Southeast Asian economies into this whole architecture when I give these numbers. Add them, and the number becomes even more stupendous. So bring them in, and Asia today hosts the fastest growing digital economies of the world. Now, the growth of these economies, as these economies have grown, as these digital economies have grown in size, they've been accompanied by a rapid acceleration in the rate of cyber penetration, as well as the expansion of the cyber capacities and the capabilities of these host nations. It's gone hand in hand. This has been hard commerce at work, building capacity, investing in infrastructure, constantly pushing connectivity past formidable physical barriers which existed and extending into new geographies. It's a constant process of commerce which has taken place. And then there is the other side. Commerce is one side. So several of the states in this region also have unsettled physical boundaries, disputes over borders. Some have irredentist claims on each other's territories. Tensions and conflicts in this situation are inevitable. So commerce is one side, conflict is the other side. And no doubt the tensions and contests of the physical world carry over into the virtual. I would say that both commerce and conflict are in this realm actually 2 sides of the same coin, 2 sides of the same reality. Both commerce as well as conflict, as they move forward, ultimately demand the creation of norms. And that is the way. They demand the creation, they demand the evolution of norms. And for both of these reasons, it is logical that Asia become the pivot for the evolution and creation of these new cyber norms, the hub for the incubation of the new digital governance architecture. The question is not whether there is a thriving digital Asian universe that will demand the setting up of norms, but rather what are going to be its likely contours. Where is it headed? Who participates in it? And who manages this universe? Will it be, or can it be managed beyond the Great Firewall of China? Are countries like Korea and Japan with 92% internet penetration still the leaders, or will the raucous, teeming, young and growing economies of South Asia and Southeast Asia script the future? And these are all questions which we will see debated here. And this is not to say that there is any doubt that Europe, the Americas, and Africa will all actively engage and determine the future of the virtual world and its digital natives. One internet, and if you believe in one internet means that this is as inevitable as it is the only outcome possible. And given that outcome, how will we incubate the new digital governance order? What are the various institutions, cohesive or non-cohesive? How will they allow it? And will the divergent approaches discover their own common space, resulting in a path of least resistance? That is one way forward. We somehow find the way of least resistance moving forward, which actually displeases none, but unfortunately helps no one either. Or can we find new space for a reasoned, deliberated articulation of what the globalized internet really needs? And in this, the private sector, civil society, as well as governments actively work together to ensure an evolving, transformational, and ultimately inclusive digital space. So to this end, the conference that has been planned features several experts from not just the Asia Pacific, but also Africa, from across the world, who address the policy priorities of connecting the next billion. Digital governance regimes are unlike other global regimes, like multilateral trading organizations or climate bodies, by the sheer diversity of the stakeholders involved in these negotiations. And their sheer capacity also makes the arena one where multiple voices need to be heard and they need to be accommodated. And it is our opinion that many countries today have come to realize this, and others are gradually, slowly coming on board. Many are seeking to articulate those positions, seeking to alleviate whatever concerns they may have, and searching for institutions and platforms where these can be voiced. And that is the whole logic behind having CyFy, why this platform has been created and why it is not just one event. It's a series of events, series of activities which takes place, as Samir has told you, through the course of the year. So questions which will animate this conference require naturally a frank and free discussion, and we are going to see lots of that, I'm sure. So to conclude, let me just say that unlike the other commons, cyberspace is one common that has been created by us. It is not a given. It has been built by us. It has been created by us. And the key to managing any commons is encapsulated in just one word, and that word is trust. It's an important word. It is not trust just of each other, but trust and ownership of the rules, the norms, the architecture that define the framework of this commons. So while there are no easy answers, our very motive for organizing CyFy is that we remain optimists. We are optimists not because we have any unshakable belief in the goodness of human nature. No, our optimism does not spring from that. Our optimism springs from the simple fact that we are pragmatists. We are pragmatic about it all. We remain optimists because we believe that our interdependency, it is our interdependency which brings us together, 140 participants from over 45 countries, and about 500 delegates who are going to join us over the next 2-3 days. This is the interdependency which makes the development of this trust inevitable. It is something which will evolve, it is something which will grow. And we're extremely pleased that CyFy has grown to be this kind of a global platform. because of the large number of stakeholders who have willingly come forward, our partners across institutions, governments, corporate sector, who have come forward to strengthen our hands and make this possible. So even as I welcome you all, I thank you all for bringing this to the stage where we are today. So let me wish you, these 2.5, 3 fantastic days of debates, discussions, and camaraderie. And thank you all for being with us in New Delhi. Thank you.
I was just sent a message before we started this particular ceremonial part of the event that ORF hosted 50 conferences last year related to the digital sector, and just to put it in context, that's what Chris Painter attends every week. So we didn't do too well there. But let me now proceed to the first keynote of this evening. Let me welcome Lieutenant General Ashish Ranjan Prasad, who's the Signals Officer-in-Chief of the Indian Army. He has experience in counterinsurgency, counter-terrorism in the north and northeast of this country. He has commanded a co-operating signal regiment in the Northern Command and also been commander of the elite electronic warfare establishment. Sir, we are delighted to welcome you to CyFy, and can I request you to deliver the first keynote of this event?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, thank you, Samir. Thank you very much for very briefly introducing me. And I would also like to thank Dr. Sanjay Joshi and the ORF for having given me this opportunity to be among all of you. It's a great opportunity and it gives me a great pleasure because as of now, as I'm standing in front of you, I find myself among so many researchers, thinkers, industry captains, academia, and whole lot of internet users. This is truly, a phenomenal thing. More so that we have come here for a very common cause of deliberating on the issue which is there today. Well, the issue is very vast and it is very thematic and contemporary because in today's world, we find the cyberspace is ever increasing. It is growing at an exponential rate and it is posing very many challenges. In fact, as we stand today, in India itself, more than 25% of population are actually using internet. And as we say that come about 2021, we will be more than 40% population of India will be actually using internet and will be contributing to the cyberspace. It's challenging also. It's challenging because its contours are ever changing. The first thing is that its technology is absolutely going in such fast pace that even policy makers are unable to make policies so that it can be, some kind of a taming could be done. So to that extent, we find that it's a very vast and challenging field, and we do realize that if we have to make use the best, then we have to find out our means as to how do we find the vulnerabilities to be reduced and how do we find that our hardening is improved. Computer engineers on one hand are constantly attempting to interconnect everyone with digitally connect every individuals, every person, and every system. And this kind of an interconnection also gives this so much of vulnerabilities. So I will be more talking towards from the how do we go about cyber hardening and how do we go about cyber doing audit and how do we go about cyber, how do we go about assuring ourselves so that information is not lost from our own systems and organizations. The thing that was said by Sanjay Joshi that this complete cyber world is actually resting on one word, that is trust. And this trust at times is not there. whether it is a pure hardware platform. Sometimes we find that the kind of with the global supply chain management, what we are going to get, the products, it may be having lots of, some kind of infection, some kind of a malicious program in it, some kind of a trapdoor in it. We all have to be very cautious about it. So before we make this as a part of our own system, we have to make sure that it is free from that. The second thing is that anybody and everybody who is a user of internet is actually a potent source of threat also to all of us. To that extent, we should be capable of making our all hardening of cyber system in a manner that no unauthorized entry is made by any of these kind of hackers, any of these kind of cyber, as they claim themselves to be cyber warrior. And what is very, very challenging about it, it does not have any boundary. Cyber does not have any boundary. In fact, today we do not know whether the cyber attack is going to be coming is from where. And the worst thing is that you can't even come to know your data or anything has already been stolen. So to that extent, we have to make sure that this low-cost entry of the cyber theft, or this which is fully undetectable or detectable or zero trace living, that we have to see that it does not succeed. The aspect to take care is that whatever hardware that we procure, we have to make sure that it is sufficiently cyber hardened. And whatever procedure that we adopt, we have to make sure that it is absolutely foolproof in terms of our cyber audit and cyber enforcement of those measures which can prevent them to take place. We in governmental agency are actually suffering from a kind of a double whammy. First of all, there is a lack of policy. And the second thing is that the technology is developing so fast that whatever technology that we are going to get, it is having some kind of a procurement delay, and therefore technology which is deemed to be advanced today is actually obsolete by the very time that we are able to procure it. We definitely need a very good cyber infrastructure and ecosystem and a sound policy framework. To remedy it, we have to understand that the policy framework of the government has to support all our nations so that our aspiration in the cyberspace is lived up to the expectation. And the best thing would be that we live up to the thing which is known as trust in the systems, trust in the software, and we have to get some kind of assurance that we are not put to any kind of a jeopardy. One of the areas that I have come across in the governmental communication of cyber world, that we do not find any kind of the policy framework on a crypto system. So this is one of the lacking area where we think that the policy framework should be formed. And however, the steps have been taken, such as manufacturing of cryptographic system by private industry in India. This very important policy, which we will be soon coming to know. The second thing, that evaluation of secure storage system. Again, the policy framework for this would be coming. And third thing, that the software, if the solution is totally, if the cryptographic solution is there, which is totally software based, then how do we certify and how do you accredit it? How do you do the accreditation to it. As of now, we have got only one agency who is carrying out such certification, but we are recommending that there could be some more accreditation agency. At the end, I should like to say that we have to go a very long way in this cyber space, and we have to make this absolutely trustworthy, and so as to we are able to use our information and all our tools in a very, very assured manner. To that, I wish that all these IT professionals, all of us who have gathered, we should be able to find a very thought-provoking answer, and we wish that all our deliberations can find some in the governmental policy as well. Thank you so much.
We'll move to the next part of this opening segment, something that ORF and many in India are now beginning to awaken to. Its countering violent extremism, law enforcement. It is challenging communal fabrics, and it is challenging the way society is organizing itself. We at ORF have decided to pursue this as one of our most important lines of research in the days ahead. And we were delighted when, on our invitation, the special representative of the United States, Mr. Sharik Zafar, agreed to participate in this particular conference. So let me invite the US Special Rep to the Muslim communities, Sharik Zafar, to join me on stage, and we will have a conversation on CVE, on his role, and what can be expected as we try to develop this inexact science called countering violent extremism and counter speech. Sharik, please join me. So, I was discussing this particular panel with someone before we came down, and she mentioned that when you read the CV and you look at the photograph, they don't match. So when you read the CV, you would expect someone very different. And here you are, this dynamic, young, special rep trying to take on an issue that is really concerning all of us today. So that was one comment made by someone. I thought I'll share it with you.
Don't try to sweet talk me before you pounce. I actually don't feel particularly young or dynamic, though it's wonderful to be back in India and Delhi. I arrived at 1 a.m. this morning, if not but for this amazing opportunity to be here at the Observer Research Foundation, I think I probably would still be in bed. But look, I'm very honored to be here. I want to thank Director Joshi, Samir, everybody that's part of what I think is truly an indispensable organization on a topic that is really, really crucial. So it's really an honor for me to be here.
And I'm going to call you Sharik. We agreed on
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So, countries around the world appoint special representatives for issues which are viewed as problematic or difficult to resolve. For example, climate change. Was the creation of your office an admission of an intractable problem in engaging with the Muslim communities?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. This idea, the title "Special Representative to Muslim Communities," and if I'm honest, I'm not sure I would have chosen that exact words, but that's the title that I was given. We have this joke in Washington. I'm from Texas. I was born. I was raised in Houston. I went to college and law school in Austin. I'm actually a dual citizen. I'm an American and a Texan. And don't ask me to pick, but Texas is very different from Washington. I was told that in Washington, the shorter your title, the more important you are. Senator, president. So when I found out that I was the special representative to Muslim communities, I was quite surprised. But look, the thing is this: I think there's no question that when we decided to have a special representative to Muslim communities, it was, let's be honest, the fact that we had concerns with our relationship with Muslim communities. Now, the paradox, of course, is that there's no single Muslim community, right? There's Muslim communities, and Islam is very, very diverse. Islam in China is distinct from Islam in India or Islam in the Arab world. Of course, there's some commonalities. But there was a recognition that we need to do a better job. Now, there's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, many of them here in India, right? And they care about the same issues that we all care about. climate change, peace and security, a growing economy. So I purposefully engage very broadly on a whole host of issues. That's a smart thing to do because there's all these opportunities. But also the reason I engage broadly is because it creates space, I believe, to have very upfront, sometimes difficult, sometimes sensitive conversations. For example, on today's conversation about violent extremism. If we only engage on issues of security, we miss opportunities, but also I think there's some unintended consequences that people feel that we're a problem. And Muslim communities are not a problem. There's so much dynamism, so much opportunity. Now, I have to say that one of the things I've been most surprised about, given this title, because I think many of us in government need to work ourselves out of a job. My hope is that in 5 or 10 years, we don't need to have a special representative for climate change because everybody recognizes the importance of confronting that threat. By the same token, I hope in the near future, I don't think this will be the case, that there isn't a special representative to Muslim communities because our normal order of business is that this job is no longer necessary. That said, one thing that I've been very pleased about is that whenever I travel around the world, there's been a level of engagement. People generally are willing to have conversations. And for that, I'm very, very grateful.
So your bio also says that you have been working for a while now on the issue of countering violent extremism and especially around counter speech and reclaiming the narratives.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you manage to conduct that job when we see that many states, many societies are often themselves the actors who propagate such extremism or who actually support such radicalism? So you are up against states and entrenched systems.
That's right. And so there's two aspects that we have to do. When it comes to state-sponsored terrorism, state-sponsored violent extremism, or example, when states propagate through various mechanisms influence that that frankly is poisonous, right? Of ideologies that drive societies apart. I think there's a couple things. I think it calls for government-to-government conversations, diplomacy, tough diplomacy at times. And I think increasingly you're going to see the United States government have these conversations because we need to have these conversations. But a lot of the times the sources of violent extremism, including online, are the result of non-state actors, right? And what we need to do in response to that is because, in the United States, I know everybody in this audience will agree that we believe in an open internet that's interoperable, with multi-stakeholders, right? So the solution isn't to shut down the internet. The internet's not the problem, period, full stop, right? The problem are those terrorists, those criminals who abuse the internet, right? So there's calls for we need to shut down sites, shut down these things. Well, first of all, that's just simply not possible. Now, I do believe companies like Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, others deserve an enormous amount of credit because they have increasingly started policing their own platforms. And they've shut down millions of posts, ranging from cyberbullying to pedophiles and sexual predators to, of course, violent extremism. They deserve a lot of credit for that. And that's their prerogative as private businesses to monitor their own terms of use and to see how users use their sites. But we'll never be able to. The nature of the internet, as a general thing, the nature of the internet is that we'll never be able to shut down completely. So we have to create alternative narratives. Now, the challenge here is that governments, look, I'm Muslim in my personal capacity, but I don't have any credibility when it comes to Islam or what Islam is or what Islam isn't. I'm not an alim, I'm not a religious leader, right? And so governments, we understand the threat, we have the intelligence, but we also recognize that oftentimes those people that are best suited to create and disseminate alternative narratives are civil society, religious leaders, parents, young people. Now, the image that these non-state actors, the propaganda they use is very black or white. You're with us or you're against us. Unless you believe what I do, you're a kafir, right? And they paint a very seductive picture. It's very black and white. I think one way that we can reclaim the online space, and we mean the international community, not just government, but all of us, is by building the capacity of those people who have a story to tell. They just need help telling it. Look, Muslims, we have a story to tell, right? Sometimes people just need help telling it. And the story could include victims' narratives. It can include parental appeals, mothers who've lost their sons to ISIS, humor and snark. There's a terrific Facebook report out that I think we'll discuss a little bit, but one of its findings was that humor can play an important role. Myth busting. People say that you'll come over here building the so-called caliphate and you'll have this incredible experience, when in reality you're cannon fodder, right? Religious arguments. And I think that what I want to get to is a crowded information environment that's gray, that's muddy, that's messy, that's not black and white. Terrorists speak in black and white. What I'd like to see, because there's no single silver bullet, is a muddy, gray, messy information environment, so when a young person goes online looking for answers, he or she, most likely he, is going to find a number of different results. And there'll be some doubt, there'll be some complexity, because I do think that ultimately that will help help the terrorists get their propaganda out.
So you mentioned two things which are particular interest. I think you mentioned the word online. I'm going to come to that. But you also said the role of the credibility of imams and the religious leaders and the role they play. Now the problem here is that extremists are in a sense capturing their own religion. But along with them, you have people from outside communities also capturing and appropriating religious ideologies. Now how do you respond when this takes place online? A space not mediated by traditional guardians of religious space, and which is completely open to self-interpretation. So what is the credibility of religious leader online?
Right, and for a government like the United States government, we're a secular government. We're a deeply religious country. If you go to a mosque or a temple or a synagogue, that's not unusual. But we also have a First Amendment to our Constitution that really limits how government can engage religion. Now, the reason we did that is the people who founded our country were fleeing religious persecution, so we wanted to protect religion from government. But it also limits what we can do. The thing is this, I've had a chance, this is my second visit to Delhi. I visited, in my first visit, I got to meet a number of amazing religious leaders. And that's true, I've met religious leaders in Southeast Asia and other parts of the Arab world who have a very credible, authentic message promoting peace, promoting diversity, promoting inclusion. The challenge is oftentimes the way they communicate is through a khutbah on Friday, a sermon. And it can be 30, 45, 55 minutes. Sometimes they're very compelling. If I'm honest, sometimes they're boring. As young people, their attention spans are shrinking, right? And so, I've engaged Maulvis and Maulanas, and other imams in Southeast Asia, whose interpretation of Islam is something that we would all find, something that's very, peaceful and tolerant. But the way that they've communicated is by writing books, and these are really large books. The challenge is that young people, attention spans are shrinking, right? And the bad guys, ISIS and others, they're using 30, 45-second video clips to communicate. So one thing that we have to do, and we being the international community, not just governments, but all of it, we have to build the capacity of those with religious credibility, men and women, religious leaders, imams, to communicate online. Now, I've seen examples of that. So now you'll find here, even in India, that you have people that are now going online, developing short videos, things like that. And it's a positive trend, but they need support. Now, if it's government support, that undermines credibility. So this is why it's so important the private sector, foundations, and others are all part of this, because these are people that have a terrific story to tell. It's authentic, it's credible, they're committed to doing this because they see their religion being under assault, but they simply don't have the resources, they don't have the technical capacity. And so that's something that we all have to think through, because ultimately, when you have terrorists using religion to propagate ideologies and using very sophisticated methodologies, we have to look for alternatives, and we have to empower those who have credibility.
Just as for my benefit, have you been able to convert some religious leaders and bring them on Snapchats and bring them on Instagrams and bring them on the new mediums where the youngsters would communicate with them? We have engaged religious leaders, community leaders, civil society, parents. But I want to emphasize that when we do so, we don't do because we're blaming them.
We're not saying that, look, you're at fault. The reason we do it is because we need their help. And I have to say that they recognize it, because if you look at who are the overwhelming majority of victims of terrorism, of this strike, it's Muslims, right? By and large, are the ones that are being killed. And so they recognize that their communities are under assault. And so we have, there was a terrific example. I had reached out to some to private sector organizations, and one, I'm not going to tell which one, but it's a video sharing company. We went and we just said, listen, we need some help. And on their own, they held a workshop where they flew in imams, religious leaders, other members of the Muslim community, and trained them on how to develop videos. Mm-hmm. And so now what we're seeing is more and more tech-savvy imams and others are using this, not only to push back against radicalization and hatred, but also because they recognize that if they're trying to communicate their messages to young people, they have to go to those platforms where young people are active. And that means the platforms that you just shared.
So when we were preparing for this visit of yours to this conference, one of the questions you asked me in one of the earliest mails was that can we engage with the filmmaking community? And I told you that the closest film star we have at ORF is Arun Sukumar, my co-chair, who you will see in the later part of the event. But how does that fit into your agenda? When the movies themselves are seen as the capitalist other, things that they detest. The message is actually about this other, which includes Hollywood. So how do you use that to change the narrative?
Because of the position that I hold, I've had the opportunity to travel around the world. I have a global mandate. And one thing I found is that stories matter. Stories matter. Stories not only reflect a society's norms, I believe over time stories can change a society's norms, for better or for worse. And right now, there are a number of bad stories. Mm-hmm. There's a story in the Middle East that says that if you don't believe what I believe or practice what I practice, I can kill you. There's a story that says that Muslims and Hindus and others and Sikhs and Jains, we cannot live together peacefully, even though that's not the case, and that's certainly not the experience, overwhelming experience. There's a story that says that women shouldn't be educated, that they should only stay at home, etc. There are a lot of bad stories. And I believe the best way to counter and push back against a bad story is to tell a truer, more authentic, a better story. Now, there is a continuum of storytelling. So if there's a young person who's already radicalized to violence and is committed to going to Syria or to Iraq to fight, it's unlikely that he or she will their minds be changed by watching a video or a film. That you need a very specific, targeted approach. But if you take a step back, I do believe you can have very targeted messaging that's culturally sensitive, about a range of themes that I do believe can be an important source of preventing people from getting radicalized in the first place. But I do think, speaking more broadly, when you look at serialized dramas, which are widely popular in this part of the world, film, Bollywood, it reaches hundreds of millions of people. And there's social science research that finds that these types of films and things, film, cinema, television, they impact how societies behave. I'll give you a very empirical study from the United States. Are any of you familiar with shows like ER or House? Have anybody watched any of these shows? These are health sort of medical dramas. They're widely popular.
There are many in India who are familiar with that.
Right, yeah. So there was our Centers for Disease Control did some research, and they found that by and large, many Americans were getting health information based on these shows. Right, and so they not from the National Institute of Health website or not from their doctors, but what they saw in ER, and so they recognize, my word, we need to make sure that the information on these shows is accurate. So now we have funded the University of Southern California's film school, one of the best, to be a resource for Hollywood to make sure that the messages that that they're putting out when it comes to film, to medicine, is accurate. By the same token, I've seen examples of serialized dramas shot in this part of the world, in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, which have fused in themes against sectarianism, against violent extremism, in a way that are culturally appropriate, that actually, I believe can play a greater role. Now, I think this has just been happening just because, people want to do the right thing. My question is, what more can we do, working governments, film industry together, to actually, push the envelope forward and do this in a much more concerted way. So I think if there's any country in the world that's mastered the art of storytelling, it's the one that we're sitting in today. And so that's the reason I was intrigued, because I do believe that storytellers can play a positive role.
So storytelling and with short, considering the short attention spans of the new generation.
That's right. It's these are short form videos that are incredibly important. You watch them right now. Many of the most heavily watched forms of media right now are things that none of us have. That I was surprised to learn. There's shows, the entire shows that are on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And where young people, I have 2 daughters, and they watch these shows on YouTube that I've never heard of, right? But they're short, they're punchy, they're captivating, and that's what young people are listening to. So I do think there's a continuum from short form videos, serialized dramas, all the way to feature film.
Now you mentioned India, and since this is your second visit here, how important is India to this whole effort around CVE and CVE online?
Incredibly important. Absolutely. It's for my government, India is an indispensable partner. Secretary Kerry was just here. We had a very successful strategic and commercial dialogue. I think our partnership is growing. God willing, it will continue to grow. But let's talk about the challenge of terrorism, which is something that, given recent events, we're in this together. But let's look. There's about 180 million Muslims in India. How many have left to go fight in Iraq and Syria? I was just meeting with some government officials recently. It's like 50 or 60. I mean, if you look at the number of Muslims in India and the small number that have gone, a fraction of a percent, to me, not only is that a strength of India, which deserves credit, but that, frankly, is a strength of India's Muslim community. So there's something happening here in India that needs to be recognized. There's best practices. I think part of it is the fact that, like in the United States, in the United States, we have every ethnicity, race, religion, sect, tribe as part of our citizenry. India also has an incredibly diverse population. This diversity, this is a national asset for both of our countries. People of different stripes, of different lives, backgrounds living together peacefully. So there's something that our democracies share. And I think India has an absolute, a model worth sharing. And that's positive. Now, more negatively, the reality is, as we have more and more battlefield success in places like Iraq and Syria, my fear is that as there's more pressure there, terrorists are going to look for other opportunities to act. We've certainly seen that in the United States recently, in New York. And so they're not only recruiting in Arabic, they're recruiting in English, they're recruiting in Hindi and other languages of India. And so we can't rest on our laurels. We can't take this threat for granted. Based on the conversations I've had and my colleagues have had with the government of India, I know that we're taking this threat very seriously.
So let me now quickly go to the report I think both of us have read, and in a sense the one you referred to, the Facebook demos report titled Counter Speech on Facebook. Yeah. In its conclusion, the report articulates that counter speech and counter narratives are dependent on culture and location. That's and it kind of coincides with what you just told us at the beginning. Yeah. So for example, Tunisia and Morocco respond to hate speech differently. UK and France do it differently as well, and for that matter, India has its own story to tell. Now, clearly, counter speech, you cannot have one set of counter speech strategy for a diverse set of communities. As a special representative of communities which live in different parts of the world, how do you create culture-specific narratives, especially online, given that the medium is blind to borders? Yeah. So how do you direct messages to certain communities alone?
It's hard. I mentioned this report earlier. I encourage everyone to read it. I think it's an example of Facebook's leadership in this field, where they've actually done some empirical research about what's worked in the area of counter speech. Look, it's hard. One thing, when I started my career as a civil rights lawyer. I was a lawyer, then I was a civil rights lawyer working on 9/11 backlash issues. After 9/11, we had we had the backlash against people who were perceived to be Muslim. Oftentimes, the victims were Portuguese, but they looked like me. In fact, the first victim of a post-9/11 backlash attack was Balbar Singh Sodhi, an Indian Sikh, right?
That's right.
So we learned, I learned very early that ignorance combined with bigotry is a very serious challenge, very dangerous combination. And that's what we're dealing with today, ignorance combined with bigotry. Radicalization, we used to think it was a linear process, that you enter over here and you come out this end radical. Now we've recognized that it's much more complex. We're not dealing with hard science or math, 1 + 1 = 2. We're dealing with social science, a social phenomenon, which is very localized. That means how a young person may become radicalized in the UK will be different than in the Arab world or in Southeast Asia. Right. So again, it comes back to a continuum of engagement, a continuum of messaging. We need local language messaging that's focused and targeted specifically in the using terms and jargon that's relevant to that particular community. But I do believe that they are broad themes. So themes that are false but have been put out, that there is a war on Islam or Muslims. Well, yeah, if there is a war on Islam and Muslims, it's being propagated by those terrorists who kill more Muslims than anybody else. That the West in Islam are in the struggle, which is not true. Islam is part of the West. In my country, the United States, Muslims have been part of the country since its founding, right? So there are broad themes that we do have to push against, but we also have to communicate locally. And that's what makes this challenge so hard, right? We'll never be able to go one-to-one in terms of media. It's relatively, given communication technologies, it's so easy to get negative messages online, right? So the goal isn't to go one for one. Every time they put something out, we put something out. Rather, I think what we need to get to is a crowded information environment. Again, let's get to gray. They're talking black and white. Let's get to gray. Something that, that references victims' appeals, humor, myth-busting, religious arguments, right? And the more, and let's try to make them as locally, culturally relevant as possible. But and I think I've those of us in government who have been watching this space for a while, I think we're getting to a point now where people are recognizing there is a need for this. Now, what we have to do is to empower those people, those private sector actors, those in civil society, religious leaders who have a story to tell. They just need help telling it, helping them tell the stories that we need to get out.
So I'm going to ask you the last two questions, and just to tell the audience that you will have a chance to question him when he comes back on a panel a little later in the conference. The last two questions. The first, of course, I'm going back to the report again, which actually makes a point that the counter speech and the good stories that people tell have a degree of higher intensity when an offline event takes place. So you have events in Paris or in France, and then the good stories start being told. How do you sustain that intensity when nothing else is happening, when nothing bad is happening? And I think this is what we need to understand, that the bad guys work all the time, and we tend to respond only to events. We are episodic in our response, the good guys, that is.
We need to instill a passion for moderation, a passion for mainstream thought. Look, the extremists are by nature going to be passionate all the time. That's the definition of an extremist, right? Our challenge is to instill a passion for moderation. Now, I don't like this term moderate Islam, because there's nothing wrong with being devout, whether you're Hindu or Christian or Muslim or Sikh or Jain or Buddhist. If you're a devout, if you're a believer, it's okay to have very devout, deeply held beliefs. So I don't like this term moderate Islam, but I understand but this idea of moderation, right? This idea of mainstream thought, we have to instill a passion. We can't wait for the next attack and then say, okay, this has to be ongoing. And this is something, and I do believe that there's individuals out there, in this room, I've talked to them. I don't want to name them because I don't want to associate the United States government's brand with them, because they are independent in their thought, and I don't want to undermine their credibility. But frankly, I don't. I think sometimes, we see this amazing imam or religious leader, and governments will put our arm around them and say, this person is terrific, We have to remember that their credibility is a precious resource, right? And sometimes it's okay. Sometimes it's okay for us to acknowledge people in private. We don't necessarily want to undermine them, but we have to look for ways to support them, right? But it's not just governments. Look, we're all in this together. We're in an international community. These messages now, yes, they're localized, but in many respects, they're global. And we're in this together. And so we need governments, the United States government, the Indian government, we have to work together. There's a role for the United Nations and multilateral institutions, but increasingly I truly believe there's a role for the private sector, for foundations and others. Because let me tell you, terrorism, violent extremism, it's bad for business, it's bad for growth. And this is a challenge that affects all of us. So I really do believe that there are those who are already passionate about moderation, who are passionate about promoting peace, who are passionate about promoting diversity and inclusion. And they need support. They have a terrific story to tell. They need help telling their story.
And my final question, so when can we expect you back in India for a conversation with some Bollywood stars on countering violent extremism? Because I believe you've been planning something.
You know, I think, look, it is, you know, the star appeal, you know, is important. I also think it's important to get to the story writers, the writers, the directors, the producers, the people who choose. You know, there was this movie, I'm going to mispronounce, I don't watch a lot of Bollywood, I don't get a lot of time, but my wife made me watch this one movie, which I thought was quite good. Some Baijan.
Baijan.
Bajrangi
Baijan.
Baijan,
That's
right? Now look, that was one you had a girl born in Pakistan with a speech impediment or speech, she comes over, gets treatment in India, you have a very devout Hindu who helps her. I mean, that was, for a moment, that was a great story. And I think in people's, you know, it was a story that we all welcomed when we care about peace in this part of the world. And there's other stories where you see that really have the power. And so I think, I'm not saying this sort of casually. I do believe that storytellers have a role to play. And it would be an honor to come. It's always an honor to come to India. It would be an honor to have that conversation, not just with the stars, because, you know, the actors, at the end of the day, they do, you know, what the script says. But, you know, how can we affect the scripts? Mm-hmm. And that said, look, this is not about propaganda. This is not about governments controlling entertainment. Rather, this is a recognition that this is a challenge that affects all of us. We're all in this together, and everybody has a role to play, and that includes the private sector. And one amazing aspect of the Indian private sector is the entertainment sector. It's something that we share in Hollywood and Bollywood. And so let's see if we can work together.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zafar, and we look forward to receiving you back in Delhi. And I think he's, in a sense, used three words that define this challenge before us: ignorance, bigotry, and amplified by the internet. And I think that's what we have to respond to. Thank you so much.